There we go. Without any further ado, here is John Witte.
Thank you, Mark, for that nice introduction. And thank you for the invitation to be a part of this series. I've always admired the Salem Poetry Project. And welcome to your members who have tuned in, wherever they are. My friend Mike McGriff described this experience of reading on Zoom as disembodied. And, I think he sort of nailed it. I feel the ghostly presence of some very dear friends. So thank you for being here. The poems I'm going to read are mostly new poems. And they seem to be gathering themselves around the working title, Saints and Angels. And I think you'll see why. The first is called Looking Up. Where have we been and what are we doing here? Under a sky, the blue of heaven, a hawk not to be mistaken for a god circling clockwise, that is, counterclockwise to us below, stealing over the gray earth, not to be mistaken for a garden, or these starlings, angels chattering in the luxurious foliage of paradise. Still, there's the sun to be considered, a warmth on our upturned faces, as well as rain and sleet, and the darkness through which the stars flicker. In the choked damp, there isn't much to see, and yet that's what we're doing at the moment, looking up. I'm going to, it seems an occasion to read poems for certain friends, and this particular poem is for John and Robin Gage. It's called Colony Collapse. The honeybees are vanishing from our lives, so what troubles us about this dwindling more than another? The snow leopard, for example, prowling the Himalayas soundlessly on its huge paws, seems less terrible than this crazed behavior of bees, their incoherent dance flying away from the hive in every direction, dying alone and dispersed, unable to find their way back to the hexed cells, the hive glutted with honey. We've gathered and mashed the dead bees to a paste, testing for pathogens and pesticides. It bothers us, doesn't it? This silence, instead of the fervent hum of summer, the rotting away of their golden homes. So there's I need to give you a little background on this poem because it's about a character, Jakob Böhme. He was a German religious mystic, contemporary of Shakespeare's. He was a cobbler and didn't have any formal education. So though he was a practicing Lutheran, he really cut loose from Christianity altogether, and he arrived at a kind of pantheism, as you'll see. The word last appears in this poem in the context of making shoes, and some of you may know a last is the wooden form of a foot that you use to shape the shoe that you're making. So Jakob Böhme, the cobbler drowses over his bench, the half-made shoe, a wilted lily in his dream. His knife slips from his hand. He was not cut out for this pounding of damp leather into the shape of a foot. He would have nothing between him and the earth, this yearning of all things. to return the wood of his last to its tree, his moon knife back to its gleaming ore, and the cow remembering her meadow before the sledge fell and the peeling of her flesh commenced, and she was still in the grass, indistinguishable from God. It occurs to me that this is kind of like being a DJ, you know, where you're behind a mic and you're sending out these tunes. So I'm sending this one out to my dear imaginary friend, John DeStefano in New York. I won't talk a lot between poems, but this one also requires a little bit of background. First of all, this is a poem I'm currently writing. It's unfinished, it's a work in progress. And any writer will tell you that this is a bad idea to read a poem that's this green, but I'd like to anyway. And I'd like to read this for the environmental artist George Gessert. It's a kind of manipulation of a Confucian legend about a character named Gongyi Chang. He was the principal disciple of Confucius. It's a legend that was mentioned by Li Po, the Tang Dynasty poet, 700 years later, and evidently a legend that was really beloved of the Tang poets. Tao. This is how you came to be what you loved, listening to the birds, though they caused a peck of trouble when you overheard them discussing a body hidden in the forest. But when you spoke of it, they arrested you for the murder, for how else would you know? And you were silent in your cell until one day you laughed at the sparrows and told the jailer that a cart had overturned, spilling its grain, and they were inviting all to the feast. And it was so, and you were freed then and flew from your cage. So I think you gathered Gongyi Chang could understand the speech of animals and particularly birds. There's a lot that I'm hoping to get into that poem that I haven't been able to yet. Another legend, this from the Old Testament. Those of you who know your Bible know about Balaam, a character who appears numerous times, often the butt of jokes, criticism. This is Balaam's ass, and it's from a legend thought to be of Persian origin. Seeing things. And so he rose in the morning and saddled the ass and set off, but the animal turned aside into a field, seeing before her an angel lifting its blazing sword. But he saw nothing and dragged her back onto the road, which came to a narrow place with walls on either side. And once again, she tried to turn and pushed his foot hard against the stones. So he cursed and drove her on until they came to the place with nowhere else to turn, neither right nor left. And the ass, seeing the angel, fell to her knees, and he raised his whip then. Her mouth opened, and she spoke, "What have I done to make you strike me?" And he saw at last the angel that would have slain him had she not turned away. So, charging ahead into the 20th century, I'd like to read this for Judith Montgomery, a poet who has written numerous poems that I wish I had written. Kafka chewing and chewing everything 45 times for health. He has that faraway look of someone chewing his food, breaking down the potatoes and pogroms, the insurance agency, his bread job, the loss of fingers and limbs, chewing his meaty German tongue, his Yiddish, chewing the jackdaw, a crow-like bird capable of imitating human speech, like the child who, despite our efforts to make him stop, eats hair, clay, and ashes, or grass. Even grass has nutrients if it's all he has to eat. He has to eat the prog his loved ones are fleeing, or worse yet, remaining. His teeth and jaws ache, his loneliness and violent ejaculations. I have hardly anything in common with myself. He grinds and gnashes. He shifts the bolus to his other cheek and goes on chewing, feeling it soften, the bitter pulp. He winces and swallows. I should have given you a heads up. The jackdaw that appears in this poem is the name Kafka means jackdaw. The jackdaw is a kind of crow, and so that's how it finds its way. Pigman. He hears in his sleep their cries and lamentations. In the pig shed, somehow they know the slaughter is coming. The truck will ease its ramp into the sty and open its gate. He hears their supplications, as if a prophet were among them, or the foretaste of blood crowding the chute, unable to turn back. The pigman who watched over and nurtured them, now urging them forward in his dream, their half-human voices bleating in the dark, in the star-pierced tranquility. They know, somehow they know. So, thinking about saints and angels, one of the prominent saints in this collection is Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, and this is a poem. There'll be actually a couple of elegies now, or elegiac poems like this one. It's the you in this poem is Thoreau. Okay, it's addressing Henry David Thoreau, and the subject of the poem is the death of his brother John, his older brother, the person probably most beloved to him. And John died of lockjaw, of tetanus, a hideous death. And he wound up with this tetanus when he was sharpening his razor, and he cut his hand. And we're talking now mid 19th century, and he died of lockjaw. The nick. You keep a piece of paper under your pillow, so when you bolt awake from the dream of seeing your brother flushed with merriment, you write in the dark, as if your sleep had taken you to Calcutta or Concord, searching for the mystic path to your cabin by the pond, your brother muzzy in the morning after your long palaver, guiding the razor over his cheek. You cannot see the pencil moving. You will learn what you know when you see what you've written, a little nick, such as happens, a small welling, then fever and locked jaw, your face convulsing, your hand writing off the page onto the table, a plank in which you hear in the silence the gnawing of a worm. So here's a creepy little coda to this poem. I describe Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, as sympathetically experiencing the lockjaw that was killing his brother. A kind of psychosomatic lockjaw. And it turns out, although this was unknown to me at the time I wrote the poem, that he did exactly that, that Thoreau suffered horribly from a psychosomatic lockjaw in physical sympathy with his brother who was dying. This poem is in memory of the photographer John Boggess, a good friend. And it's called Where. You awaken surprised to find us gathered around your bed, floating up in the dark room of memory, a shot of your friends or children wading out into the lake, the life guard's empty chair like an elevated throne. You fill the awkward silence with quips and cracks about the world you're leaving to us, making us laugh with a story about a recent shoot in Seattle. Its twists and turns, names, and even shutter speeds, but we know none of this could have happened. You were here in the ICU all along, and while you know us and can see the sadness we are trying to conceal, you do not know where you are or where you are going. Another elegy, this one in memory of Roger Skillings, the writer who hilariously explored the seamy underbelly of Provincetown, Massachusetts. Roger died of Alzheimer's. Forget me not. Not the end of the world, you've forgotten the name of a flower, not bluebells tolling, not a storm revolving in turmoil around the golden calm of the eye beloved of bees. This being one of the 7 ways we have to forget how one memory eclipses another, as when we remember your mischievous grin and forget for the moment that you are dead. Or does our forgetting start with a flower? Is this how we begin to let go of our lives? Okay, I'm going to lighten this up a bit. A child explains the angels. Angels are all around us, she says. They fall from the night sky. You see, it isn't easy being good all the time. And some of them find it hard to pay attention and throw their food and stop coming to class. And these are kicked out of heaven and appear as bugs or bats, but most of all as birds calling and swooping past, who are allowed to keep their wings. That's how we know they've come from someplace else and know a lot of stuff we don't know. This next is for my partner, Deb, called Plight. Here we return in shared memory to the ocean and the distant cove where we drowsed together, awakening to find ourselves trapped between cliffs and the rising tide, drowning our voices, seeming now the turbulent privacy of a dream, the wind-lashed flames of the driftwood fire, invisible in sunlight. We had come to a glorious, precarious place from which there was no escape. Waiting what seemed a lifetime, though it was just the few hours needed for the moon to pull back the curtain of ocean for us to return. In memory, it came to pass, our wedlock there. We were young, and it came to pass. This is for my daughter, Anna, and it's
John, you suddenly are muted. So just move the cursor down to the bottom left, and there should be a way to there you go.
Yeah, I wonder, I'm piling the poems on top of the mouse. I think that's what would happen. All right. A doe. Thank you for seeing her in the dark, a wobbling, car-struck doe on the shoulder, blindsided by what she thought was a cougar, and she was willing to give herself. But it raced on, leaving her wild-eyed, watching you approach, drawing your knife, and thank you for kneeling with her beside the highway, then cutting her throat, holding her until the end, and taking her home, hoisting and bleeding her out. The dog uneasily circling, sniffing the puddle, then easing off her fawn robe and tanning it with her own oily brains. Thank you for sharing her with us, listening, chewing in silence her bewildered flesh. The afterlife. Home from school, our granddaughter explains how a body was buried in Egypt. They kept your heart in a mud jar, but they pulled out your brain with a hook through your nose and threw it away, its only purpose being to inflate your head. Then an angel comes and puts you back together. If we hadn't had a child who had a child, we would never have known how they provided the grave with clay figurines of everything we'll need in the next life, if a farmer, an ox and plow, if a weaver, a loom, if a scribe, papyrus and pen. So one more poem, but I want to thank everyone again for being here, and I hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed reading. Let's see. It's called Lakes and Rivers. And speaking of Li Po and the Dong Dynasty poets, if you notice a debt to Li Po, Du Fu, Wang Wei, and so on, that pleases me. It's there. It's from my other daughter, Josie, Lakes and Rivers. They made me nervous, rivers. I never understood them. The relentlessly babbling voices and the ridiculous accumulations of water losing themselves in the sea. In the quiet of lakes, I found myself reflected back. But now, a grandfather, I might live beside the river, hurrying away and renewing itself and hurrying away. Thank you. Let's see, Mark, you asked me to tell you whether I would field some questions, as long as they're not hard questions. And I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
If anyone's got a question, just go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. Don't be shy.
So my question is about the earlier poems that you recited to us about people in other parts of the world, poets or philosophers or writers.
Yeah.
And what is there a theme in your mind when you were writing these series of poems, or is it just serendipitous?
I mean, why those people? Why choose those people? Yeah. Gosh. For reasons I can't explain, I never had a sense of history when I was growing up, and including my own history, my family's history. Excuse me. And the sense of history suddenly awakened at the age of about 50. And so I've just been deeply fascinated by history and the past and memory and how memory works. And so these figures from various historical times embody the same themes that I'm working with in the present. So to what I hope is that this gives these themes historical resonance. It identifies in these older, sometimes much older figures, the same concerns, the same basic human concerns. In the case of these poems, spiritual concerns. I'm not a religious person at all in any way, and yet I feel like a spiritual person, and so hence this presence of angels, or at least curiosity about angels, which themselves, as you probably know, appear in every culture, in every place in the world throughout history. People have thought that they saw something moving over there, and wondering if there are angels and what they might be. And so for me, they're mostly metaphoric. They're often animals or animal spirits. I don't know if that answers your question, but kind of a roundabout answer.
Thank you, John. Do we have other questions?
That was a good one. Well, I could ask myself a question, and
I think we have Michael going to be asking one.
all right.
John, lovely reading. Thanks for
Thanks.
Thanks for that. I have just a question. My fox ears kind of pricked up at some of those lines, and I thought I could detect that unpunctuated sort of synthesized syntax that you use.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that's finding its way into your new poems, and if so, has that changed? Has your relationship to that style changed with new poems?
Now, Mike, are you thinking of the center margin ones from Disquiet?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, at that point, I completely abandoned punctuation, and as Mike McGriff points out, the poems they can achieve a kind of a surging quality. They can accumulate a lot of forward momentum, and all of these poems that I read, I don't know if I can show you, but they're all let's see, long line couplets like that. You see, so yeah, this has to do with energy and release of energy, the kind of surprise, I guess, and the kind of excitement and sense of sometimes imbalance or danger, like when you're driving too fast, and which incidentally causes you to be acutely alert. So I don't know, where else to go with that. Like, that's one of the, I was watching a friend, I think I was actually watching your Zoom reading, Mike, when someone asked what seemed to me the most diabolical question anybody could ask a poet. And you didn't ask this, by the way, but I think you were asked, how did you achieve your voice? Well, and I thought, I mean, my heart broke for you. It's like, it just can't be answered. There's just things that you just cannot really get to. It has to do with how you use language, how you hear language, who you are. I mean, your voice is, someone once said to a young writer who was anxious about having a voice or acquiring a voice, and this older senior writer said, write for 20 years every day and you'll have a voice. Just leave it at that. You don't have to really explore any more than that. Thanks for that. Anything else? Any other questions?
I think we have time for one more. Nancy, I think you have a question.
Thank you.
I was just wondering how your work has evolved over your writing career. Can you see any pattern at all in how it has evolved, or is it simply your interests or just magic of your pen?
God knows.
Boy, that's one of the hard ones. That's a very hard question. It's a good question, and I wish I had a ready answer. One thing I know that's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that, to my complete surprise, I've become fascinated by form, and not the ABBA sonnet traditional kind of form, but what I like to think of as organic form. So in the same way that a leaf exhibits bilateral symmetry, it's a very clearly formed shape. Most things in nature, our own bodies, are bilaterally symmetrical. And so my last book, Disquiet, was full of these odd kind of vase-shaped and leaf-shaped, and they're all center margined, and a form that exerted a lot of pressure on the language, and insisted on a lot of invention and a lot of imagination and so on. And in a rather more relaxed way, these couplets are that way too. Over time, those of you who write and have tried to write in form probably know that you begin, damned if you don't begin to think in that form after a couple of years of doing it. Your thoughts and your language just naturally seem to want to fall into that form and accommodate it like a vessel that of a certain shape that you're filling. Other than that, I mean, I think although some of the poems tonight were rather dark, I admit, particularly some of the first poems, but I think that my poems have gotten a little lighter, a little. I've allowed more light and more breath and more joy alongside the despair. So I hope that's the case.
It seems
but you know, yes, go ahead. Sorry.
It seems to be your work is absolutely magnificent. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying so. I wish that were true.
It is.
Any other questions?
Yeah, it looks like Stan unmuted.
I just want to know how to make my face appear on the screen. It just says my name.
Yeah, good question. Is that something I can do?
No.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's a technical question. I just signed in late, and it only says my name. I wanted it to be, seen as a person.
It could be that your video is muted on the bottom of your frame for the Zoom. There's a mute and microphone symbol and a video camera symbol. And if it's got a red line through it, you might be muting your video.
Thank you, Jay.